Welcome to a journey through one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. Giants have always captured our imagination. Even people who don't know much about the Old Testament have heard stories about these huge beings who once walked the earth long ago. What many don't realize is that giants weren't just one group of beings. The Bible mentions several different tribes and families of giants. All of them came from the Nephilim, strange hybrid beings born from the union of sons of God and human women. Each race of giants had their own special traits and played important roles in Bible stories. In this journey, we'll explore ancient writings and reveal who these mysterious giant races really were. These giants lived after the Great Flood and left their mark on biblical history. Get ready to discover hidden truths that few people know about. These powerful beings once challenged kings and entire civilizations. Their stories remain buried in ancient texts, waiting to be uncovered and understood by those willing to look deeper. The giants first appear early in the book of Genesis, chapter 6. Here we find one of the Bible's most fascinating stories. The text says that sons of God saw that human women were beautiful. They took these women as wives and created a new line of beings called the Nephilim. These huge creatures lived on earth before the Great Flood. Surprisingly, they showed up again after the floodwaters receded. But who exactly were these sons of God mentioned in the holy text? The answer lies in the original Hebrew words used, Ben-Ha Elohim. This term, along with the Aramaic Be-Allah, traditionally refers to angels and heavenly beings. This makes it clear that giants were actually born from unions between humans and fallen angels, heavenly beings who left their proper place and became corrupt. In other words, giants were descendants of ancient demons. Genesis clearly states that before the flood, these beings spread across the earth. They caused terror everywhere, corrupting humanity and helping create the chaos that led God to send the flood judgment. However, the text also mentions that after that time, meaning after the flood, giants mysteriously reappeared on earth. How was this possible? Many scholars and religious teachers believe fallen angels continued to interact with humans after the flood. These dark beings infiltrated ancient civilizations and created a new line of Nephilim descendants. Stories tell of these demonic beings working with priestesses of pagan religions who worshipped ancient gods. The Bible often warns that these pagan gods weren't just made up. They were actually demons in disguise, seeking worship and power. We can see evidence of this in historical and biblical records. For example, Egyptian magicians performed supernatural feats before Moses and Aaron, turning their staffs into real snakes. This wasn't just clever trickery. It showed that dark forces were working through these people. Therefore, giants weren't just physically large beings. They were living proof of the rebellion in heaven, a visible sign of the corruption brought by fallen angels. These giants continued to play a mysterious role in human history long after the floodwaters dried up. After the flood, a new generation of giants appeared on earth. They spread across the Middle East and beyond, becoming warrior tribes mentioned in the Bible. Many of these giant tribes settled in strategic territories. They challenged entire civilizations and became one of the biggest obstacles for the people of Israel. The Bible suggests at least 5 distinct races of giants lived in the region. They spread from the Levant to Mesopotamia and even reached ancient Egypt. Their descendants lived in lands that today include Israel, Iraq, Syria, and neighboring countries. They built strongholds and impressive cities throughout these regions. One of the most striking stories about these beings appears in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. When Israelites were sent to spy on Canaan, they were terrified when they saw the descendants of Anak, one of the most feared giant tribes. The Israelite spies described the Anakim as enormous, frightening creatures. They were so huge that the Hebrews felt like grasshoppers in comparison. The reports also highlighted the strength of the Canaanites, whose cities had impressive walls and were defended by these supernatural beings. But who were these 5 races of giants? Where did they come from? What did their names mean to the people of that time? Let's explore the identity of these massive tribes and the mysteries surrounding their existence in the ancient world. Since the beginning of human history, stories of giants have filled our ancient records. Among these massive creatures, one race stands out as the most feared and mysterious: the Rephaim or Rephaites. This name appears many times in ancient scriptures. In singular form, they were called Rapha, but their group name hints at something beyond mere physical size. The word Rephaim in ancient Hebrew and Phoenician carries a dark meaning. It doesn't just describe huge beings, but entities somehow connected to the realm of the dead. The very meaning of the term suggests something ghostly, like spirits wandering among the living or the undead. But why did ancient people see them this way? The answer goes back to an event that changed human history forever: the Great Flood. According to ancient traditions, giants were wiped out by the flood. They were supposed to be extinct, completely erased from existence. Yet, centuries later, they returned. What could explain this comeback? Ancient accounts suggest it was the work of fallen angels. These beings, worshipped as gods by some civilizations, once again mixed with human women. This created a new line of giants, a continuation of the ancient stock believed to have been destroyed. The height of the Rephaim was truly mind-boggling. They were titans among men, reaching incredible heights. Biblical records mention that one of them, Og, king of Bashan, was approximately 15 feet 5 inches tall and nearly 6.5 feet wide. This description wasn't unique to him. It suggested other Rephaim had similar measurements. They were like mountains of flesh and bone, beings who walked the earth like gods of war and terror. Their very existence defied natural laws, and their presence struck fear into the hearts of ordinary humans who encountered them. The second race of giants that walked the lands of Canaan and terrified many peoples has become well known through novels and Hollywood films: the Anakim. If any giant race struck pure dread in Canaan, it was these feared sons of Anak. Unlike the Rephaim, whose names suggested connections to the dead, the Anakim carried in their very name a disturbing clue about their origin. The term Anak wasn't just a name. It revealed something about these colossal beings' lineage. Derived from ancient Sumerian, Anak or Anakim meant something that completely changes our view of these giants: children of those who fell from the sky. This definition alone casts a shadow over the true nature of the Anakim. They weren't seen merely as enormous and powerful beings, but as direct descendants of entities that came from the sky, the ancient pagan gods worshipped across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Their parents weren't ordinary humans, but those who, according to ancient traditions, fell from heaven. Whenever the Anakim appeared in ancient records, writers emphasized their immense height and incredible strength. The scriptures describe them as formidable warriors, so tall they towered over ordinary men by more than 6 to 10 feet. Estimates suggest their height ranged from 11.5 to 14.5 feet. Some accounts even claim they could rival the Rephaim, possibly exceeding 15 feet in height. Their massive size and legendary strength made them feared throughout the ancient world. If the Anakim were feared for their celestial lineage and the Rephaim for their ghostly nature, there was still a third race of giants that terrorized the Middle East, the fearsome Emim. These giants are mentioned in Deuteronomy 2:10-11. The scripture states, "The Emim formerly lived there, a people great and numerous, and as tall as the Anakim." This is an important detail. The Bible itself emphasizes that the Emim were as tall as the Anakim, suggesting these titans also exceeded 13 feet in height. They might have even rivaled the Rephaim themselves in size. The idea that these giants were terrifying is reflected in their very name. According to Rabbi Rashi, the term Emim can be translated as fearsome or monstrous. This wasn't just a tribal name, but a direct reflection of their frightening appearance and the psychological impact they had on people who encountered them. The Emim weren't just giants in size. They inspired genuine terror in all who saw them. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this race wasn't just their height. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, one of our main historical sources on ancient giants, described a disturbing detail. The Emim had a terrifying scream, comparable to a lion's roar. This fierce, guttural sound reportedly froze even the bravest warriors with fear. Furthermore, their appearance was described as grotesque. While the Anakim were strong and the Rephaim seemed like specters from another world, the Emim were described as true monsters. Their features were distorted, reflecting the brutality and horror they inspired. Whether through their strength, enormous height, or terrifying presence, the Emim left a lasting impression on the memory of ancient peoples who encountered them. The Zuzim, the strong ones. Among the hidden mysteries of antiquity, another race of giants stands out in the Middle Eastern landscape, the Zuzim. These massive beings appear in ancient records as creatures of extraordinary strength. Their name comes from an Aramaic term with an interesting meaning. Zuzim suggests something rigid, strong, or robust, a name that reflects not just their impressive height, but also their superhuman resilience. Reports indicate the Zuzim stood between 10 and 13 feet tall, making them true titans who walked the earth. They were imposing figures with brute strength that made them feared in battles and territorial disputes. Like the Nephilim, Rephaim, and Anakim, they belonged to the mysterious giant lineages that marked ancient history, leaving traces that continue to intrigue scholars today. But what happened to the Zuzim? In Genesis chapter 14, we find an intriguing mention of these beings. The account describes how Chedorlaomer, king of the Elamites, led a devastating military campaign against various tribes and nations. Among his victims were the Zuzim. According to sacred texts, this monarch launched a relentless attack that resulted in the massacre of many of these giants. This weakened their presence in the ancient world significantly. The destruction of the Zuzim was just one episode in the ongoing war between humans and giants, described in scriptures and oral traditions. As human civilizations grew stronger and more organized, they began to push back against these frightening beings. Among the shadows of the past, in ancient times when colossal beings walked the earth, one last race of giants stands out in Old Testament records. Rarely mentioned and shrouded in mystery, they were known as the Zamzumim. This tribe of gigantic beings lived in the Middle East, specifically east of the Jordan River. The Zamzumim shared many similarities with the Zuzim, another giant race from the same region. They were tall, imposing, and possessed immense strength. Ancient records indicate their height ranged from 13 to 14.5 feet, making them true titans compared to ordinary humans. They were prominent in biblical geography, described as fierce warriors who occupied strategic territories and frightened neighboring tribes. However, even these giants couldn't resist the relentless tide of history. The Zamzumim came into direct conflict with the descendants of Lot, especially the Ammonites. These people fought the giants for control of fertile lands that once belonged to this ancient race. The sacred texts report that the Ammonites eventually destroyed the Zamzumim and took their lands. They assimilated the conquered territories and gradually erased traces of this colossal race. Many scholars believe the Zamzumim were actually a branch of the Rephaim. If this theory is correct, it means this lineage inhabited not only Jordan, but also regions of Syria and present-day Israel. This suggests that in the distant past, vast areas of the Middle East were dominated by these giants. The descendants of these mighty beings may have been hunted to extinction by the smaller peoples, who later emerged and built civilizations in these lands. The story of the Zamzumim represents the final chapter in the saga of biblical giants. As human civilizations grew and expanded, the giants faced increasing pressure. Their numbers dwindled as they fought wars against organized human armies. The Bible records many conflicts between the Israelites and various giant tribes. Perhaps the most famous giant-slaying story is that of David and Goliath. But this wasn't an isolated incident. The Bible mentions many other giant warriors who fell in battle against Israel's armies. King David's mighty men killed several giants in their campaigns. The geographical spread of the giants shrank over time. Once inhabiting vast territories across the Middle East, they were gradually pushed into smaller, more isolated regions. Their strongholds fell one by one as human kingdoms grew more powerful. By the time of Israel's monarchy, giants appear less frequently in biblical texts. They seem to become rarer, with only occasional mentions of individual giants rather than entire tribes. This suggests their numbers had greatly decreased by this period. What ultimately happened to the biblical giants? The texts don't provide a clear answer. Some scholars believe they were eventually wiped out through warfare and natural causes. Others suggest they might have slowly diminished in size through intermarriage with regular humans. Perhaps their bloodlines thinned until their descendants were no longer recognizable as giants. Whatever the case, by the time of the New Testament, giants no longer played a significant role in the biblical narrative. Their age had passed into legend. The story of biblical giants continues to fascinate us today. Their massive size, supernatural origins, and fearsome reputations capture our imagination. They represent a mysterious chapter in human history, beings who blurred the line between the natural and supernatural worlds. Archaeological discoveries have occasionally fueled interest in the historical reality of giants. Various ancient cultures around the world, not just in the Middle East, have legends of gigantic beings who once walked the earth. Could these stories share a common origin? The biblical account of giants raises profound questions about humanity's past. If these stories contain historical truth, they suggest our world once held creatures far beyond our current experience, beings of supernatural origin whose very existence challenges our understanding. For people of faith, the giants represent a cautionary tale about the corruption that entered the world through rebellion against God's order. They stand as reminders of a time when boundaries between the divine and human realms were broken, with devastating consequences. Whether viewed through a lens of faith, folklore, or historical inquiry, the 5 races of biblical giants remain one of the most intriguing mysteries of ancient texts. Their stories continue to be told and retold, inspiring wonder and speculation across generations. Perhaps we will never know the full truth about these mysterious beings, but their legacy lives on in our collective imagination, reminding us that the ancient world may have been stranger and more wonderful than we can possibly imagine.